complicated system of behavior which is partially dictated by society and partially dictated by the expectations or the wishes one nurses oneself.
Yes.
Now, this is not the real personality, in spite of the fact that people will assure you that that is all quite real and quite honest, yet it is not.
Yes.
Now, such a performance, or say, the performance of the persona is quite all right, as long as you know that you are not identical with the way in which you appear.
Yes.
But if you are unconscious of this fact, then you get into sometimes very disagreeable conflicts. Namely, people can't help noticing that at home, for instance, you are quite different from what you appear to be in public.
Yeah.
And people who don't know it stumble over it in the end. They deny that they are like that, but they are like that. They are it. And then you don't know, now, which is the real man?
Yes, yes.
Is he the man as he is at home or in intimate relations, or is he the man that appears in public? It is a question of Jekyll and Hyde.
Yes.
Often.
Yes.
It is such, occasionally there is such a difference that you would almost be able to speak of the double personality.
Yes.
And the more that is pronounced, the more people are neurotic.
Yes.
They get neurotic because they have two different ways. They contradict themselves all the time, and in as much as they are unconscious of themselves, they don't know it. They think they're all one. Everybody sees that they are two.
Yeah.
And some know him only from one side, so others know him only from the other side. And then there are situations that clash, because the way you are creates certain situations with people in relations, and these two situations don't chime in. They are just dissonances.
Yes, yes.
Acá lo que habla es de, obviamente, la persona, ¿no? Es la máscara que usamos para relacionarnos con los demás. Y uno no solo puede pensar que es la persona, ¿no? Uno puede pensar que uno es solamente eso, esa máscara. Pero es una manera de ignorar también que existen otros aspectos de nuestra personalidad. Esa imagen que mostramos a los demás y también nos la mostramos a nosotros mismos. Pero cuando no está integrada, trae problemas. Sos más neurótico.
And the more that is the case, the more the people are neurotic.
Now, you also use the term self.
Yes.
Now, the word self, then, would this have a different meaning than, say, ego or...
Oh, yes, oh, quite, oh, yes. You see, when I say self, then you mustn't think of I myself, because that is only your empirical self, and that is covered by the term ego.
Ego, yes.
But when it is matter of the self, then it is matter of a personality that is more complete than the ego, because the ego is only consists of what you are conscious of.
Yes, yes. Your awareness.
Yeah, what you know to be yourself.
Yes.
The whole personality of man is indescribable.
Yes.
His consciousness can be described. His unconscious cannot be described, because the unconscious, as I must repeat myself, is always unconscious.
Yes.
And it is really unconscious, but really does not know it.
Does not know about it.
And so we don't know our unconscious personality. We have hints, we have certain ideas, but we don't know it really. Nobody can say where man ends. And that is the beauty of it, you know. Yeah. It's very interesting. Yeah. The unconscious of man can reach God knows where. There we are going to make discoveries.
Yes, yes. Now, another set of ideas centered around the terms introversion and extroversion.
It is simply practical because there are certain...
En la parte anterior había estado hablando del inconsciente, ¿no? Esto está comprobado científicamente, obviamente, que hay estímulos que no llegamos a captar conscientemente. Y eso ya se sabía en esa época incluso, ¿no? Y Jung, por supuesto, hacía experimentos científicos, tenía una mentalidad científica. Se alejó de ese método porque él no encontraba lo que estaba buscando, como que no se podía resolver de esa forma. Se dejó, entonces, para su teoría se dejó llevar por la intuición y por el análisis simbólico.
People who definitely are more influenced by their surroundings than by their own intentions. While there are other people who are more influenced by the subjective factor. Now you see, the subjective factor, that's very characteristic, was understood by Freud as a sort of pathological autoerotism.
Yes, yes.
Now this is a mistake. You know, we have, the psyche has two conditions, two important conditions. The one is the environmental influence,
yes.
And the other is the given fact of the psyche as it is born. The psyche is by no means tabula rasa. We are a definite mixture and combination of genes,
yeah.
And they are there from the very first moment of our life. And they give a definite character, even to the little child. And that is a subjective factor, looked at from the outside. Now, if you look at it from the inside,
yes.
Then it is just so as if you would observe the world.
Yes.
When you observe the world, you see houses, you see the sky, you see tangible objects. But when you observe yourself within, you see moving images.
Yes.
A world of images.
Yes.
Generally known as fantasies.
Fantasies.
Yet these fantasies are facts. You see, it is a fact that a man has such and such a fantasy. And it is such a tangible fact, for instance, that when a man has a certain fantasy, another man may lose his life.
Yes.
Or a bridge is built.
Yes.
These houses were all fantasies.
Yes.
Everything you do here, all of the houses, everything was fantasy to begin with. And fantasy has a proper reality. That is not to be forgotten. Fantasy is not nothing. It is, of course, not a tangible object, but it is a fact nevertheless. It is, say, a form of energy.
Yes.
Despite the fact we can't measure it.
Yes.
It is a manifestation of something.
Yes.
And that is a reality. That is just a reality as, for instance, the peace treaty of Versailles or something like that. Yes. It is no more. You can't show it.
Yes.
But it has been a fact.
Yes. Yes.
And so the psychical events are facts, are realities. And when you observe the stream of images within, you observe an aspect of the world.
Yes.
Of the world within. Because the psyche, you know, if you understand it as a phenomenon that takes place in so-called living bodies, then it is a quality of matter.
Ok, acá está diciendo esto, ¿no? Los pensamientos son estímulos. Es algo que hoy en día también se sostiene. Son estímulos. Y ahí está diciendo esto. Son incluso muchos de esos estímulos internos que tenemos, como estos pensamientos, a veces provienen del exterior. Incluso se pudo haber aprendido algo en el exterior y después se incorpora.
As our body consists of matter, we discovered that this matter has another aspect, namely a psychic aspect.
Yes. Yes.
And so it is simply the world from within, seen from within.
Yes.
It is just as if we were seeing into another aspect of matter. And so, you see, the man who is going by the external world by the influences of the external world, say society or perceptions, sense perceptions, thinks that he is more valid, you know, because this is valid, this is real. And the man who goes by the subjective factor is not valid because subjective factor is nothing. Yeah. No, that man is just as well based because he is bases himself upon the world from within. Yeah. And so he is quite right, even if he says, oh, there is nothing but my fantasy, you know. Yeah. And of course that is the introvert. And that the introvert is always afraid of the external world. He will tell you, when you ask him, he will be apologetic about it. Yeah. He will say, of course, yes, I know, it's only my fantasies. And he has always a resentment. And as the world in general, particularly America, is extroverted like hell, the introvert has no place. Yeah. Yeah. Because he doesn't know that he beholds the world from within. Yeah. And that gives him dignity, and that gives him certainty, because it is, nowadays particularly, the world hangs on a thin thread. Yeah. And that is the psyche of man. Yeah. Assume that certain fellows in Moscow lose their nerve or their common sense for a bit, and the whole world is in fire and flames. Yeah, yeah. You see? It is, nowadays we are not threatened by elementary catastrophes. There is no such thing as an H-bomb. Yeah. That is all man's doing. Yeah. We are the great danger. The psyche is the great danger. Yeah. What if something goes wrong with the psyche? Yeah.
Revolucionario, ¿eh?
Yeah. You see?
Incluso para ahora.
And, so you see, it is demonstrated to us in our days what the power of the psyche is of man, how important it is to know something about it, but we know nothing about it. Nobody would give credit to the idea that the psychical processes of the ordinary man have any importance whatever. One thinks, oh, he has just what he has in his head. It is all from his surroundings. He's taught such a thing, believes such a thing. And particularly if he's well housed and well fed, then he has no ideas at all. Yeah. And that's the great mistake. Yeah. Because he is just that as which he is born, and he is not born as tabula rasa, but as a reality.
Would you perceive the world being made up of only people or extreme introverts and people that are extreme extroverts?
Well, you know, Bismarck once said, God may protect me against my friends. With my enemies, I can deal myself alone. You know how people are. They catch a word, and then everything is schematized along that word. There is no such thing as a pure extrovert or a pure introvert. Yeah. That such a man would be in the lunatic asylum. Those are only terms to designate a certain penchant, a certain tendency. For instance, the tendency to be more influenced by environmental influences or more influenced by the subjective factor. That's all. Yes. And you see, there are people who are very well balanced and are just as much influenced from within as they are from without, yeah. Or just as little. Yes, yes. And so with all the finer classifications, you know, yeah. They are only sort of point de repère, points for orientation. My whole scheme of typology is merely a sort of orientation. Namely, there is such a factor as introversion, there is such a factor as extroversion. The classification of individuals means nothing at all. This is only the instrumentarium, yes. For the practical psychologists. Yes. to explain, for instance, a husband to a wife or mother. For instance, it is very often the case, one could almost say, it is almost a rule, but I don't want to make too many rules in order not to be schematic, that an introvert marries an extrovert for compensation, or another type marries the counter type to complement himself, for instance.
Well, Dr. Jung, of course, tied in with your typology and quotation version, we, of course, know of your concepts of thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition.
Well, there is quite a simple explanation of these terms, and it shows at the same time how I arrived at such a typology. Namely, sensation tells you that there is something. Thinking, roughly speaking, tells you what it is. Feeling tells you whether it is agreeable or not, to be accepted or not, accepted or rejected.
Yes.
And intuition, now there is a difficulty.
Yes.
You don't know ordinarily how intuition works. So when a man has a hunch, you can't tell exactly how he got at that hunch or where that hunch comes from. It is something funny about intuition. I will tell you a little story. I had two patients. The man was a sensation type, and the woman was an intuitive type. Of course, they felt attraction. And so they took a little boat and went out to the lake of Zurich. And there were those birds that dive after fish, you know.
Yeah.
And then after a certain time they come up again, and you can't tell where they come up. And so they began to bet who was the first to see the bird. Now, you would think that the one who observes reality very carefully, the sensation type, would of course win out.
Yes.
Not at all. The woman won the bet completely.
Yeah.
She was beating him on all points.
Yeah.
Because by intuition she knew it before.
I see.
See? Now, how is that possible?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes, you know, you can really find out how it works by finding the intermediate links. You see, it is a perception by intermediate links, and you only get the result of that whole chain of associations.
Yes.
Sometimes you succeed in finding out, but more often you don't. So my definition is, intuition is a perception by ways or means of the unconscious.
Yes.
That is as near as I can get. This is a very important function, because when you live under primitive conditions, a lot of unpredictable things are likely to happen.
Yes.
And there you need your intuition, because you cannot possibly tell by your perceptions, by your sense perceptions, what there is going to happen.
For example, more specifically, what would be an
Un poco es lo que hizo él con su teoría, ¿no? También se basó mucho en la intuición, me parece a mí. Y eso que dice también es cierto, ¿no? La intuición intenta predecir lo que va a pasar en algún punto, porque si te basas solamente en la percepción, básicamente el animal salvaje te comería.
example or a difference between an intuitive extrovert and an intuitive introvert?
Well, you know, you have chosen a somewhat difficult case, you know, because one of the most difficult types is the intuitive introvert.
Yeah,
you know.
I have.
The intuitive extrovert, you find among hunters, bankers, gamblers.
Yes.
That is quite understandable.
Yes.
But the introvert the introverted variety is more difficult, because he has intuitions as to the subjective factor. namely the inner world.
Yes.
And of course that is now very difficult to understand, because what he sees are most uncommon things, and he doesn't like to talk of them.
Yeah.
If he's not a fool, because he would spoil his own game by telling what he sees, because people won't understand it.
Yeah.
For instance, once I had a patient, a young woman, about 27 or 8, and her first words were, when I had seated her, he said, "You know, doctor, I come to you because I have a snake in my abdomen." I said, "What?" He said, "Yes, a snake, a black snake, coiled up right in the bottom of my abdomen." And I must have made a rather bewildered face at her. And she said, "You know, I don't mean it literally, but I should say it was a snake. It was a snake." You see? Now, you see, our further conversation a little later was that she said, that was about in the middle of our treatment, that only lasted for 10 consultations. She had foretold me, "I come 10 times, and then it's all right." I said, "How do you know?" "Oh, I got a hunch," you see.
Yeah.
And really, about the 5th or 6th hour, she said, "Doctor, I must tell you, the snake has risen. It is now about here." Hunch. And then on the 10th day, I said, "Now, this is our last hour, and do you feel cured?" And she said, beaming, she said, "You know, this morning, it came up and came out of my mouth, and the head was golden." And those were her last words. Now, you see, that same girl, when it comes to reality, she came to me because she couldn't hear the step of her feet anymore.
Yes.
Because she walked on air.
Yes.
Literally.
Yes.
She couldn't hear it, and that frightened her. And when she came to me, I asked her for her address. And then she said, "Oh, pension so-and-so. Well, it is not just called pension, but it is a sort of pension. And it is, I never had heard of it."
Yes.
And I said, "No, I'm curious, I never have heard of that place." "Well, it's a very nice place," he said. You're curious enough, there are only young girls there, very nice and very lively young girls. And they have a merry time. I often wish they would invite me to their merry evenings. And I said, "But do they amuse themselves all alone?" He said, "Oh no, there are plenty of young gentlemen coming in, and they have a beautiful time, but they never invite me." It turned out that it was a private brother.
Yes.
And she was a perfectly decent girl, you know, of a very good family, not from here. She had found that place, I don't know how. And she was utterly unaware that those were all prostitutes. I said, "For heaven's sake, you fell into a very dark place. You hastened to get out of it." You see, that was her sensation.
Yeah.
She didn't see reality,
Yeah.
but she had hunches like anything, and they came off.
Yes.
Now, you see, such a person cannot possibly speak of her experiences.
Yes.
Because everybody would think she's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
I myself was quite shocked when I thought, for heaven's sake, is that case a schizophrenia?
Yes. Yes.
Because you don't hear that kind of speech.
Right.
But she assumed that the old man, of course, knows everything, and he even doesn't understands such kind of language.
Yeah.
So you see, if when the intuitive, the introverted intuitive would speak what he really perceives, then practically nobody would understand it. You would be misunderstood. And so they learn to keep things to themselves. And you hardly ever hear them talking of these things. That is the greatest advantage. But it is an enormous advantage in another way. Not to speak of the experience they gather in that respect, but also in human relations. For instance, they come into the presence of somebody they don't know, and suddenly they have inner images. And those inner images give them a more or less complete information about the psychology of the partner.
Yes. Yes.
You know, that is, but the case can also happen that they come into the presence of somebody who they don't know at all, not from Adam, and they know an important piece out of the biography of that person.
Yes, yes.
And are not aware of it, and tell the story.
Yes.
And then the fat is in the fire.
Yes, that's right.
You see, so the introverted intuitive has in a way a very difficult life, although one of the most interesting lives.
Yes.
But it is difficult often to get into their confidence. It's just a sort of a skeleton to which you have to add the flesh, or say it is a country mapped out, you know, by triangulation points. And that doesn't mean the country consists of triangulation points.
Yeah.
That is only in order to have an idea of the distances.
Yes.
And so it is a means to an end. It only makes sense, such a scheme, when you deal with practical cases. Well, I told you that case of that intuitive girl, who suddenly came out with the statement that she had a black snake in the bed.
Yeah.
Well, now, that is a collective symbol. That is not an individual fantasy. That is a collective fantasy.
A collective, yeah.
That is well known in India.
Yeah.
For instance, she has nothing to do with India, but we have it too. It was generally human.
Yeah.
But it's entirely unknown. So that I even the first moment thought perhaps she's crazy.
Yeah.
But she was only highly intuitive.
Kundalini.
Yeah.
It is in India known. It is the basis of a whole philosophical system of Tantrism.
Yeah.
This is Kundalini. Kundalini serpent.
I see.
You see, and that is something known to some few specialists.
Yeah.
Generally, it's not known that we have a serpent in the abdomen.
Yeah.
But that is a collective, you see, that is a collective dream or a collective fantasy.
Yeah.
It may be, you know, that what the unconscious has to say is so disagreeable that one prefers not to listen.
Yeah.
And in most cases, people would be probably less neurotic if they could admit the things. Because these things are always a bit difficult or disagreeable or inconvenient or something of the sort. So there is always a certain amount of repression, but that is not the main thing.
Not the
main thing is that they are really unconscious.
Yes.
And you see, if you are unconscious about certain things that ought to be conscious, then you are dissociated.
I see.
And then you are a man whose left hand never knows what the right is doing. And counteracts or interferes with the right hand. Now such a man is hampered all over the place. You see, then we have the problem. That is the problem for an intellectual man. And then I say, now, you see, you don't know, you have no answer. I have no answer. Now what are we going to do? I say, now we must see what you dream. Because the dream is a manifestation of the unconscious side. Now you never had heard of the unconscious side. So I must explain to him that he has an...
Qué poca importancia se le da a los sueños hoy en día en la psicoterapia, ¿eh? Al menos también es poco lo que se acuerdan los sueños los mismos pacientes o consultantes. Si no se acuerdan lo que sueñan o no suelen contar sueños. Pero es una realidad también esto, ¿no? Del inconsciente, la persona que no es consciente del todo de esas conductas que le hacen mal. En general, el malestar proviene de un lado más inconsciente que consciente, ¿no? Porque si fuese consciente lo podrían manejar de otra forma. Y bueno, es en el proceso terapéutico en el cual empiezan a hacerse conscientes también y dejan de estar tan disociados.
Unconscious. And that the dream is a manifestation of it, and if we succeed in analyzing the dream, we might get an idea about that power that makes him think like that.
I see.
In treatment, for instance, in the treatment of neurosis, you have to do with that personal unconscious for quite a while. And then only dreams come that show that the collective unconscious is touched upon.
Yeah.
Now, as long as there is material for personal nature,
Yes.
you have to deal with the personal unconscious.
Yes.
But when you get to, say, to a question, to a problem, which is no more merely personal, but also collective. You get collective dreams.
Yes. Yes.
And then we are there where we can begin with the observation of the unconscious. And then, day by day, one goes on by the data the unconscious produces.
Yes.
You see, we discuss the dream, and that gives a new surface to the whole problem. And he will have another dream, and the next dream gives again an answer, because the unconscious is in a compensated relation to consciousness, and after a while we get the full picture.
Yes.
And if he has the full picture and has the necessary moral stamina, well, then he can be cured.
I see.
But in the end, it is a moral question whether a man applies what he had learned or not. There is a sort of typical way in which the integration of consciousness takes place. Namely, the average way is that through the analysis of dreams, for instance, you become acquainted with the contents of the unconscious. I already told you this to begin with, all personal material.
Yes.
Subjective questions, questions of the individual's difficulties in adapting to environmental conditions, and so on.
Yes.
Now, it is a regular observation that when you talk to an individual, and this individual gives you insight into its inner preoccupations, interests, emotions, in other words, hands over his personal complexes, then you get slowly and nilly-willy into the situation of a sort of authority.
Yeah.
You become a point of reference. You know you are in possession of all the important items in a person's development. I remember, for instance, I analyzed a very well-known American politician, and he told me, any amount of the secrets of his trade. And suddenly he jumped up and said, "By God, what have I done? You know, you get $1 million for what I have told you now." And I said, "Well, I'm not interested. You can sleep in peace. I shall not betray you. I forget it within a fortnight." Now, you see, that shows that the things people hand out are not merely indifferent things. When it comes to something important, emotionally important, then they hand out themselves. They hand out a big emotional value, as if they were handing over a large sum, as if they were trusting you with the administration of their estate.
Yes.
And they're entirely in your hands.
Yes.
Often, I hear things that could ruin those people utterly if it's publicly known. Or it would give me, if I should have any blackmailing tendencies, unlimited power to blackmail them. Now, you see, that creates an emotional relationship to the analyst. And that is what Freud called the transforms.
Yes.
Which is a central problem of analytic psychology. It is just so as if these people had handed out their whole existence, and that can have very peculiar effects upon the individual. Either they hate you for it or they love you for it, yeah. But you are not indifferent to them. And there is then a sort of emotional relation between the patient and the doctor.
Yes.
Now, when you hand out such materials, then these contents are associated with all the important persons in the life of a patient. Now, the most important persons are usually father and mother.
Yes.
That comes up from childhood. The first troubles are with the parents as a rule. So, in handing over your infantile memories about the father or about the mother, you hand over also the image of father and mother. Then it is just as if the doctor had taken the place of the father, yeah. Even of the mother. Yeah. I had quite a number of male patients that called me Mother Jung because they handed over the mother to me.
Yes, yes.
Curiously enough.
Yes.
Esto es muy cierto, ¿eh? La transferencia como que el paciente parece como que te da algo valioso y único que incluso no se lo da a ninguna persona. Ni siquiera se lo dan a su pareja o amigos. Es algo que le da solamente al terapeuta. Es increíble. Y esto también, ¿no? De que muchos pacientes empiezan, parece, a comportarse como niños. No importa la edad que tengan, es como que proyectan en vos una madre o un padre, vamos a decir, más de forma arquetípica, ¿no?
But you see, that's quite irrespective of the personality of the analyst. It is simply disregarded. He functions as if he were the mother, or he functions as if he were the father, the central authority. And now that is what one calls transference. That's a particular case of projection.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
Freud doesn't exactly call it projection, he calls it transference.
Yes.
That is an allusion to the old and superstitious idea of handing over a disease,
yes.
Transferring a disease upon an animal, or handing over the sin upon a scapegoat, and the scapegoat takes it out into the desert and makes it disappear.
Yes, yes.
So they hand over themselves in the hope that I can swallow that stuff.
Muy interesante eso, del chivo expiatorio, como el chivo expiatorio también recibe, ¿no? Como que transfieren los demás muchas cosas en el chivo expiatorio.
And digest it for them. And so I'm in local parties and have a high authority. Naturally, I'm also persecuted by the corresponding resistances, by all the manifold emotional reactions they have had against their parents. Now, that is the stuff you have to work through.
Acá es cuando el terapeuta empieza a tener una acción, un comportamiento distinto al que tenían los padres, y ahí es cuando se produce la transformación, diría yo.
First, in analyzing the situation, because a patient in such a condition is not free. He is the slave. He's utterly dependent upon the doctor, like a patient with an open abdomen on the operation table.
Yes.
He is in the hands of the surgeon for better or worse. And so the thing must be finished. And so we had to work through that condition in the hope that we arrive in a situation where the patient is able to see that I'm not the father or not the mother, that I am an ordinary human being. Now, everybody naturally should assume that such a thing would be possible. For instance, that a patient could arrive at such an insight when he's not a complete idiot, that I am just a doctor and not the emotional figure of their fantasies. But that is very often not the case. So I had a case that was an intelligent young woman. She was a student of philosophy, very good mind, where one could expect easily that she would see that I am not the parental authority. But she was utterly unable to get out of this delusion. And in such a case, one always has recourse to the dreams. It is just as if one would ask the unconscious, now what do you say to such a condition? You see, she says of the unconscious, of course I know you are not my father, but I just feel like that, it is like that, I depend upon you. And I say, now we will see what the unconscious says. Now the unconscious produce dreams in which I really assumed a very curious role. You know, she was a little infant, she was sitting on my knees, I held her in my arms, I was a very tender father to the little girl, you know, and more, her dreams became emphatic in that respect, namely that I was a sort of giant, and she is a very little, frail human thing, you know, and quite a little girl in the hands of an enormous being. And the last dream of that series was, I cannot tell you all the dreams, was that it was out in nature. I stood in a field of wheat, an enormous field of wheat that was ripe for harvest. And I was a giant. And I held her in my arm like a baby. And the wind was blowing over that field of wheat. Now, you know, when the wind is blowing over wheat field, these waves in the wheat field.
Yes.
And with these waves, I swayed like that, putting her as if it were to sleep, you know. And she felt as being in the arms of the Godhead. And I thought, now the harvest is ripe.
Yes.
And I must tell her. And I told her, you see, what you want and what you project into me, because you are not conscious of it, is you have the idea of a deity. You don't possess. Therefore you see it in me.
Yes.
That clicked. Because, you know, she had a rather intense religious education. Of course, it all vanished later on.
Yes. And
something disappeared from her world. Her world became merely personal, and that religious conception of the world was non-existent, apparently. But you see, the idea of a deity is not an intellectual idea. It is an archetype. It's an archetypal idea. Therefore, you find it practically everywhere under this or another name. You know, even if it has the name mana, it is an all-powerful, extraordinary effect or quality, even if it's not personal at all. And so she suddenly became aware of an entirely heathenish image.
Yes.
That comes fresh from the archetype. She had not the idea of a Christian God or of an Old Testament Yahweh. It was a heathenish God, you see, a God of nature, of vegetation. He was the wheat himself, he is the spirit of the wheat, the spirit of the wind. And she was in the arms of that Numen. No. Now, that is the living experience of an archetype. Now, that made a tremendous impression upon that girl, and instantly it clicked. She saw what she really was missing, that missing value, that was in the form of a projection in myself and made myself indispensable to her.
Yes.
And then she saw it is not indispensable, because it is, as the dream says, she is in the arms of that archetypal idea. Now that is a luminous experience, you see. And that is the thing that people are looking for.
Yes.
An archetypal experience that gives them an incorruptible value. And that is a sort of liberation.
Yes.
And that is, of course, makes her complete, you know, in as much as she can realize such a luminous experience.
Acá él dice que en la transferencia hay que correrse de ese lado, no estar como actuando o dejarse llevar y actuar el papel en el que te pone el paciente. Básicamente él lo que dice es que hay que correrse de ese lugar. Pero mi visión es que a veces puede funcionar el utilizar esa transferencia a favor de la terapia, ¿no?
She is able to continue her path, her way, her individuation. The acorn can become an oak and not a donkey. Nature will take her course. She will become that which she is from the beginning. Now, we think we are able to be born today and to live in no myth, without history. That is a disease. That's absolutely abnormal, because man is not born every day. He's once born in a specific historical setting with the specific historical qualities, and therefore he is only complete when he has a relation to these things. It's just as if you were born without eyes and ears, when you are growing up with no connection with the past.
Increíble.
From the standpoint of natural science, you need no connection with the past. You can wipe it out.
Yes. Yes.
And that is a mutilation of the human being. Now I saw, through my practical experience, that this kind of proceeding had a most extraordinary therapeutic effect. And so you see, in our days, we have such and such view of the world, such a philosophy. But in the unconscious we have a different one. And that we can see through the example of the alchemistic philosophy that behaves.
Mi punto de vista es que ignoramos, ¿no? Queremos ignorar esa historia evolutiva, evolucionista, ignorar la historia, ignorar el contexto, porque queremos creer que somos libres y que no venimos prediseñados. Pero sí, venimos en ciertos aspectos prediseñados.
towards the medieval consciousness, exactly like the unconscious behaves to ourselves. And we can construct or even predict our the unconscious of our days when we know what it has been yesterday. Now that is, with a few words, the development of my ideas.
Esto es muy interesante porque no sé si él se refería exactamente a la genética, pero como que remite mucho a esto, ¿no? A algo que por ahí incluso podría, para mí, estar en los genes, podría venir con el ser humano ya desde el nacimiento, estos arquetipos y esto de lo que habla. Bueno, hasta acá.